I believe that there's a phrase here in the south of the United States called bragging on himself or bragging on oneself. Well, the Lotus Sutra very emphatically and to a great degree brags on itself because it says in many, many places that it is the supreme teaching and that the thing that people should do is to recite, copy, and preach this Lotus Sutra. And here I'm quoting from the Kosai version that I've referenced in a previous Musings. So there's a chapter called A Teacher of the Law. And just to quote, the last few lines of the verse section, it says, "Should any preacher of this law, dwelling alone in a secluded place, in solitude, where is no voice of men, read and recite this sutra, then I will appear to him with a pure and luminous body. Should he forget sentences or words, I will tell him to his clear apprehension. Whenever such a man, perfect in these merits, either preaches to the four groups or in seclusion reads and recites the sutra, he will always see me. When such a man is in seclusion, I will send gods and dragon kings, yakshas, demons, spirits, and others to be hearers of this law. That man will delight to preach the law and expound it without hindrance. Because the Buddha's guard and mind him, he can cause multitudes to rejoice. Whoever is close to such a teacher of the law will speedily attain the Bodhisattva way. And he who becomes a pupil of that teacher will behold Buddhas numerous as the sands of the Ganges." So, again, this sutra is supreme. The directive is to read, recite, copy, preach it. And, of course, that's some of what I'm doing now. So I guess in that context, I get to see the Buddha, which to my mind, is in the form of various artworks, statues, paintings, that kind of thing. And not only that, there's another special reward, so to speak, that happens with people who are in the assembly listening to Shakyamuni preach this sutra, this Lotus Sutra. And that surprise, amazing event occurs in the next chapter, chapter 11, called Beholding a Precious Stupa. And there, just to recite the first page or so, it says, "At that time," and again, this is right after having, given this directive and this encouragement to listeners of the sutra to preach it, specifically to the bodhisattvas, because that's who is the target audience primarily for this Lotus Sutra and for all the Mahayana texts. So at that time, after encouraging them and really indicating to them what the benefits will be of them taking up the banner and preaching this sutra, that at that time in front of the Buddha in the assembly, a stupa of the 7 precious things, 500 yojanas in height and 250 yojanas in length and breadth, sprang up from the earth and abode in the sky. I'm assuming, I don't know exactly the dimensions of a yojana, but I'm thinking this is a very, very big, humongous stupa that is sprung up out of the earth and into the sky. And in the kind of elaboration that reflected the creativity of the minds of these authors and the kinds of sort of adornments, if you will, that would be attractive to the people of that time, it was indicated that the stupa was decorated with all kinds of precious things, splendidly adorned with 5,000 parapets, thousands of myriads of recesses, and countless banners and flags. Hung with jeweled garlands, with myriads of kotis of gem bells suspended on it, on every side exhaling the fragrance of Tamalapatra, sandalwood, filling the whole world. So I think I mentioned in a previous Musings about, the use of imagination. You really have to immerse yourself in this and imagine this huge thing. And of course, again, in many paintings and artworks, we see pictorial representations of specifically this stupa, because here, as my understanding, we are entering the second phase of the Lotus Sutra. that in this phase is where we really get into a much more, let's call it element of the supernatural, if you will. And of course, this chapter 11 is ultimately leading up to some pretty amazing events. All, again on the stupa, all its streamers and canopies were composed of the precious seven: gold, silver, lapis lazuli, moonstone, agate, pearl, and carnelian, reaching up to the palaces of the four heavenly kings. And I want to take just, I guess, what in Congress or in a meeting or in a committee would be called a point of personal privilege, where I want to deviate from the description of the stupa and mention one of those precious gems, which is lapis lazuli. I have to tell you that I got into lapis lazuli because they had a local gem show, and I encountered somebody who had obtained some of this from the mines of Afghanistan. And it really fascinated me because, in some of the sutras, you hear the reference to lapis lazuli, and you also, for example, in the Medicine Buddha Sutra, I believe, hear that all of the ground of that particular Buddha land is strewn with it. And this is what lapis lazuli looks like. It's kind of a blue color with gold striations or stripes going through it. And it's really beautiful. And like this particular one is polished. And of course, you can find raw examples too. But that's my little geological sidebar, if you will. But going on in terms of the description of this amazing structure that's sprung up, is that the 33 gods, raining celestial Mandarava flowers, paid homage to the precious stupa. Other gods, dragons, yakshas, gandharvas, asuras, garudas, kimnaras, mahoragas, human and non-human beings, all these 1,000 myriad kotis of beings paid homage to the stupa with all kinds of flowers, perfumes, garlands, streamers, canopies, and music, revered, honored, and extolled it. So all of these creatures, and when you hear the word kotis of beings, again, let's hear that as like a huge, large number. Tens of thousands of people and other creatures. And what are they doing? They're making offerings to this stupa. Well, what's the story about this stupa? Those of you who have read the sutra will already know the punchline, but I'll carry on for a little bit, at least until we see what emerges from the stupa. Because then, from the midst of the precious stupa, there came a loud voice, praising and saying, and again, keeping in mind that we're in the assembly where Shakyamuni Buddha is preaching the Lotus Sutra. And this loud voice says, "Excellent, excellent, world-honored Shakyamuni! Thou art able to preach to the great assembly the wonderful Law-Flower Sutra of universal and great wisdom, by which bodhisattvas are instructed and which the Buddhas guard and mind. So it is, world-honored Shakyamuni. All that thou sayest is true." So this voice, and excuse my dramatic reading, but this is kind of a fun musing to share with you. Again, it is dramatic, and it's intended to be dramatic, is that who is this, or what is going on, that this acclaim and commendation rains down in the form of this voice to the Buddha Shakyamuni for preaching this Lotus Sutra, this wonderful Law-Flower Sutra. And that gets to the, actual translation of the Sanskrit name for the Lotus Sutra, which includes somehow the term wonderful Lotus Flower Sutra. Then the four groups, now that includes, bhikshus, bhikshunis, layperson, laymen, and laywomen. In other words, we're the ones that are included in the four groups as humans. Then the four groups, beholding the great precious stupa abiding in the sky, and hearing the sound which proceeded from the stupa, were all filled with delight in the law, and with wonder at these unheard-of happenings. They rose up from their seats and reverently folding their hands withdrew to one side. Meanwhile, a bodhisattva mahasattva named Great Eloquence, one of the great bodhisattvas, he's not afraid. He steps up and he says, he perceived the uncertainty in the minds of all the worlds of gods, men, asuras, and others. So he spoke to the Buddha, saying, World-honored one, for what reason has this stupa sprung out of the earth, and from its midst this voice proceedeth? Then the Buddha told the Bodhisattva great eloquence, In this stupa there is the whole body of the Tathagata. Of yore in the past, innumerable thousand myriad kotis of Asamkaya worlds away in the east, there was a domain named Jewel Clear. In that domain there was a Buddha entitled Abundant Treasures. When that Buddha was treading the Bodhisattva way, he made a great vow, saying, After I become a Buddha and am extinct, if in any country in the universe there be a place where the Law-Flower Sutra is preached, my stupa shall arise and appear there, in order that I may hearken to that sutra, bear testimony to it, and extol it, saying, Excellent! When that Buddha had finished his course, this is again Shakyamuni telling the story of this past Buddha. When that Buddha had finished his course, he, his extinction approaching, in the midst of gods, men, and a great host, instructed his bhikshus, quote, Those who, after my extinction, desire to worship my whole body should erect a great stupa. Close quote. And I have to tell you that this actually inspired me to build a great stupa, which I've done in the wooded lot next to my home, and I've got pictures of it in a playlist called something like a stupa, a Buddhist stupa. You can check it out. In that greatness of my own local stupa, I've got a 7,000-pound boulder, kind of representing the centerpiece of it, on which I had sandblasted a quote from the Lotus Sutra, and you can check that out. So anyway, Shakyamuni goes on in his storytelling. He says, Wherever in the worlds of the universe the Law-Flower Sutra is preached, that Buddha, by the supernatural powers of his vow, causes his stupa, containing his whole body, there to spring forth, and praises the sutra, saying, Excellent! Excellent! Great eloquence! It is because just now the Tathagata Abundant Treasures heard the Law-Flower Sutra preached, that his stupa sprang up from the earth, and he extolled the sutra, saying, Excellent! Excellent! Thereupon the Bodhisattva Great Eloquence, because of the divine power of the Tathagata, said to the Buddha, World-honored one, we earnestly desire to see this Buddha's body. The Buddha addressed the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Great Eloquence thus, This Buddha, Abundant Treasures, has a profound and grave vow. When my stupa appears in the presence of any of the Buddhas for the sake of hearing the Law-Flower Sutra, if he desires to show my body to the four groups, let the Buddhas who have emanated from that Buddha and who are preaching the law in the worlds in all directions return all together and assemble in one place, and then shall my body appear. Close quote. So, great eloquence, I must now assemble the Buddhas who have emanated from me, and who are preaching the law in the worlds in all directions. So, it's interesting. First of all, note that great eloquence is only asking these questions because of the divine power of the Buddha. So the Buddha is prompting him at some unconscious level to engage in this dialogue. But again, the way I think of the three-body doctrine is that the Dharmakaya, that the Sambhogakaya Buddhas, they emanate from the Dharmakaya. And the Shakyamuni Buddha within the Lotus Sutra is a form of Sambhogakaya Buddha, in my opinion. And so also from him, there can be emanated many other Buddhas who inhabit many, many Buddha lands. This is just a sort of a cosmic complexity of myriad Buddha lands with a Buddha in each one of them. And so Abundant Treasures is saying, if the humans and non-humans and bhikshus and bhikshunis in your assembly, when you are preaching the Lotus Sutra and they see my stupa coming up and they want to see me, want to see my body, well, what you need to do first is to gather in all your emanations, if you will, all the different Buddhas that have emanated from you, Shakyamuni, and bring them into this land, into this place where you're doing this preaching. Well, Of course, that can raise some logistical problems in terms of space considerations, but there's a solution to that within the story. Great eloquence replied to the Buddha, World-honored one, we would also see the Buddhas emanated from the world-honored one and worship and pay homage to them. So that, again, he's speaking on behalf of the assembly. And of course, they would all like to see all these Buddhas. So the Buddha sent forth a ray from the circle of white hair between his eyebrows, whereupon eastward there became visible all the Buddhas in 500 myriad kotis of naotas of domains, numerous as the sands of the Ganges. All those domains had crystal for earth and jewel trees and precious cloth for adornment, were filled with countless thousand myriad kotis of bodhisattvas, had jeweled canopies stretched above them, and were covered with networks of jewels. All the Buddhas in those domains were preaching the laws with ravishing voices, and innumerable thousand myriad kotis of bodhisattvas were also seen, filling those domains and preaching to the multitude. So, too, was it in the southern, western, and northern quarters, and in the four intermediate directions, in the zenith and in the nadir, wherever shone the ray signal from the circle of white hair. So the Buddha sends forth this ray, and all these Buddhas from all directions, the 10 directions in the universe, see the ray and converge based on his request. Then the Buddhas in all directions each addressed the host of his bodhisattvas, saying, so this is what the Buddhas from all the 10 directions are saying to their bodhisattvas. Each one of them says, good sons, we must now go to Shakyamuni Buddha in the Saha world and pay homage to the precious Stupa of the Tathagata abundant treasures. Thereupon, the Saha world instantly became pure, with lapis lazuli for earth, adorned with jewel trees, cords made of gold marking the boundaries of its 8 divisions, having no hamlets, villages, towns, cities, great seas, great rivers, mountains, streams, forests, and thickets, smoking with the most precious incense, its ground strewn with mandarava flowers, spread with precious nets and curtains, and hung with all kinds of precious bells. There remained only the assembled congregation, all other gods and men having been removed to other lands. So basically, the whole realm of the Saha world was sort of magically cleared out to make room for all these incoming Buddhas and their retinues. Then those Buddhas, the emanations, each bringing a great bodhisattva as its attendant, arrived in the Saha world, and each went to the foot of a jewel tree. So actually, apparently, each of those Buddhas brought only one bodhisattva, left the other bodhisattvas in his or her retinue back in their own respective Buddha fields. Each of the jewel trees, then it describes the jewel trees under which they sat. And so I'll skip that part. So now the whole 3,000-fold world is filled with Buddhas, and all these are emanations of Shakyamuni Buddha. And again, he needed to make room for all these Buddhas. So again, each of these Buddhas, I'm skipping some here in terms of a description of how he created the space for all these Buddhas. But as I said, each Buddha had a single attendant, a bodhisattva attendant, and each of them directed their attendant to approach Shakyamuni Buddha and sent jewel flowers and said, now you say this to Shakyamuni Buddha, art thou free from disease and distress? Art thou at ease in thy physical powers? Are all the groups of thy bodhisattvas and shravakas at peace? Such and such a Buddha joins in wishing that this precious stupa be opened. All the Buddhas sent their messengers in like manner. And you know what? I'm going to end here and leave it in suspense so that you can get your copy of the Lotus Sutra and read in chapter 11 what the Buddha's response, what Shakyamuni Buddha's response is when these various bodhisattva attendants of the emanated Buddhas came to him and made this appeal, indicating that they also wanted to see the body of the Buddha, abundant treasures. So In the meantime, I'll leave it at that for now. Namo Meter Boards. Namo Meter Boards. Namo Meter Boards.